Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Today is Thursday, December 7th, 2023, and we are very glad that you've joined us. This is our last program of 2023, and we'll have a special message on the half hour from John. I am Mary Massey with my co-host, John SAKOWICZ. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to our audience listening throughout North America and through various links throughout the world. We're speaking to a professor from Bethlehem in Palestine, and this is truly an international show. So welcome to you all, and peace on earth, goodwill to women and men.
Today's program will be archived at kmud.org and on our program website, heroespatriots.org, plus social media, including YouTube and Facebook. I want to remind all of our listeners this morning that they can call in with a question on topic. The number to call, 707-923-3911, and we ask that you please be brief with your comment or question. As John mentioned, our first guest is coming to us live from Bethlehem, and he is Professor Mazin Qumseyah. Professor Qumseyah is the founding director of the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability. He is a professor of Bethlehem University, which, by the way, is the only formal educational institution in the Holy Land where Christian and Muslim students study and reflect on their respective religions and that of the others in common groups and settings. Very powerful. His books include Sharing the Land of Canaan, and his latest piece, John, is Israel Lobby in USA, which examines a number of ways pro-Israeli forces assert themselves. Professor Qumseyah is a U.S. citizen of Palestinian origin, and with that, we'd like to bring him into the program. Welcome. I understand it's evening in your area.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on your show.
We are delighted, and I might add that we have our second guest joining us for the conversation, Kathy Kelly, and she may insert questions or comments at any time, but we will spend 30 minutes with her in the second half. Where would you like to start? I am almost overwhelmed with questions. And you're in Palestine, in the West Bank. Where would you like to start?
Well, let me just start by setting the stage. Basically, in Bethlehem here, Bethlehem district, where Jesus was born, my village is the Shepherd's Field, Beit Sahur, where the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem. We're not going to have a Christmas this season in the sense of any kind of celebrations. We will have, of course, the usual prayers and so forth, but we limit it to the religious observances.
Right.
In terms of Bethlehem itself, is about 250,000 Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, and others who live isolated in a ghetto or Bantustan. This ghetto concentration camp or people warehouse for the unwanted people of Palestine. There are many of those ghettos. Gaza is one of those ghettos, and Gaza is now undergoing, Gaza Strip is about 360 square kilometers or 250 square miles. Gaza Strip is undergoing a genocide, a Holocaust. Just in the past 24 hours, 410 Palestinians were killed. Over 120 of them were children.
Wow.
And so every day there is a massacre. Israeli military is using American-made bombs to bomb residential buildings in Gaza, throughout Gaza, and already more than 55% of residential buildings have been damaged or destroyed.
Professor, I wanted to ask you about the Zionist public relations machine. And and I'll use a personal attack against me by way of example. I was raised Catholic. I once lived at the Jonah House that was started by the Berrigan brothers. It was a very difficult time in my life after Vietnam and before I entered Johns Hopkins. And in a lot of my pro-peace work in the Middle East, the Zionist lobby, starting with AIPAC, is very quick to label me either a self-hating Jew or an anti-Semite or this, that, or the other thing. Again, my background is in peace. The Jonah House was all about peace. But yet I can't seem to eradicate, the anti-Semite or self-hating Jew label from my resume. Talk a little bit about the pro-Israeli state public relations machine, starting with AIPAC.
Yes, this is unprecedented in world history. We've had colonization before, we've had massacres before, but we've never had this kind of level of control of the narrative in Western countries. I mean, if you recall, in the US, which I consider my own country also because I have US citizenship, we butchered the Native Americans. We caroled them into, reservations, etc. And of course, the colonizers used all sorts of language to justify that, saying about them that they are, barbarians or violent people who attack us for no obvious reasons. We're just circling the wagons. So the propaganda from colonial systems is historically found in all colonial structures, and certainly over 150 countries have had colonization. So everybody is familiar with this kind of language that's used. Israel is a colonizing state, of course. Palestine was multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society before 1948. More than 44 languages were spoken in Palestine. It's also a site of holy significance to a lot of people. But there was an idea called Zionism to ethnically cleanse Palestine and make it a Jewish state. And that's precisely what happened. 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people, and the rest are caroled in those reservations and Bantustans. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So the propaganda around that is, of course, understandable in the sense that it's history of colonization and colonial, anti-colonial struggles, that there's a lot of propaganda. In South Africa, the white rulers who implemented apartheid used to say about people who struggled against apartheid that they are either self-hating whites or that they are if they were black, they are anti-white. Of course, that's not true. It was not that the people of South Africa were anti-white. They were anti-racism, anti-apartheid, anti-genocide, and that is a legitimate system. So Israel controls the narrative more than any previous colonial power, controls a lot of the Western media levels of propaganda and lies that they spout every day. When you have Congress voting just recently to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism, that is horrific. Again, it's like saying anti-apartheid in South Africa means you are anti-white. Or if you are anti the Nazis, then you are anti-German by nature. This is not the case.
Professor, why does mainstream media ignore the hundreds of thousands of Jews right here in America who oppose Israel's war crimes in Gaza?
Yes, that's a very good point. For the same reason, they want to hide the truth. because the only way they can continue killing and ethnically cleansing Palestinians is by hiding the truth and by making it look as if it has something to do with Jewish Islamic struggle or something. By the way, my own family is a Christian family, and the Christians in Palestine clearly stood against Zionism, as we stood against Crusaderism when the Crusaders came to try and politically control Palestine. It had nothing to do with Christianity. It was a political movement, and the Palestinian Christians, Muslims and Jews, fought against the European Crusaders who came at that time. So there is a struggle, and the struggle is a political struggle. It's a struggle about control and so forth. And certainly, I think it's very important for people to find the truth. So, as you pointed out, thousands and thousands of Jews are out in the streets demonstrating against Zionism, demonstrating against colonialism, genocide that's happening in Gaza daily now, and they are being arrested for it. Hundreds of Jews were arrested for civil disobedience against the system and against the lies that are being perpetuated in their name.
As a final follow-up question before we get to our calls, could you remark on the efforts in the past by the anti-Zionist American Council on Judaism and then Attorney General Robert Kennedy to designate AIPAC, the Jewish lobby, as a foreign agent? What happened to that?
Well, just a bit of historical narrative. The last president, American president, to challenge Israel was Eisenhower in 1956, when he ordered Israel to pull out of the Sinai and the Gaza Strip after they had occupied it illegally. And he succeeded. That was in 1956. In 1957, the year I was born, actually, AIPAC was founded, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, as they like to call themselves, but they are a Zionist, racist, right-wing movement that supports everything the Israeli government does, and they support it even when it's against U.S. Interests, and frequently Israel, of course, attacked U.S. interests, as when they did when they attacked the USS Liberty in 1967, when they killed American citizens like Rachel Corrie and Shireen Abu Akleh and others. They kill and torture American citizens with impunity, and the lobby in Washington prevents any serious inquiry into this. So Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy actually tried to stop Israel developing nuclear weapons and tried to make them register as a foreign agents, which they should according to American law. They refused that. They mobilized their supporters in Congress, etc. But when they didn't even succeed in that lobby effort, we know what happened. John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and later Robert Kennedy was assassinated.
Right. It's 16 minutes past the hour. We have some callers waiting to speak or make comments. Call the first caller. If you're there, go ahead with your question.
That might be me.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, because it's delayed, and now I really want to talk about RFK Jr. running for office. I can't even vote. I'm Canadian, and but it's there's more than that going on. There's I want to say words that help our world. Don't we all? And,
well, what are those words? You have actually on the line. We have both of our guests for this show on the line, and they are two of the world's leading peace activists, and they are people of deep conscience. What would you say to them?
Okay, so I would say that we all have the exact same needs. Exact same needs. Every person in the world, every tree in the world. And
Right.
ultimately, it's about love. Any stronger power than that you can relate to us?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, if I
Thank
may
you, caller.
comment on this. Yes, I mean, Kathy Kelly and I believe in nonviolent resistance. She wrote some books about the subject. I wrote a book about popular resistance in Palestine, history of hope and empowerment. I was actually arrested many times for actions that are nonviolent by the Israeli colonial apartheid system. And in half the times I was arrested, there were Jews with me being arrested also. We consider this very important human struggle. This is not a struggle for Palestinians, this is a struggle for humanity. And if we allow Israel to get away with genocide, then I assure you international law and order is collapsed. And then there will be, every country will develop nuclear weapons and develop weapons of mass destruction like Israel and think that they can get away with whatever they want to get away with.
We have another caller for you. Caller, if you're hearing us and can go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you very much. So I want to continue with the South African analogy. I happen to have done a lot of work in and with South Africans during that terrible time of apartheid and post-apartheid. So I want to ask, where are the leaders like Nelson Mandela and de Klerk who actually rose above the situation and were able to peacefully bring to a very different situation and bring about peace in South Africa and much more, and end apartheid? So where are the leaders who are going to rise above this situation? And they were, and certainly Nelson Mandela and some members of the ANC, especially those in prison, were rising above as they were in prison, trying to find peaceful solutions.
Right.
Thank you,
I
caller.
wrote actually a chapter in the book about the subject of where is the Palestinian Mandela and things like that. Very briefly, because of lack of time, I will say most Palestinian leaders are imprisoned or killed by the state of Israel. And unlike South African apartheid did not have a pro-apartheid lobby in Washington, D.C. and in all Western governments that influence state of events. Israel does have that. Israel does have a lobby that's very, very strong that ensures that those people like me and many thousands and thousands of others who are resisting nonviolently are not heard from and will never be heard from in Western media, except, radio shows like this and so on, not in the mainstream media like Fox News, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, any of those mainstream media that are controlled to tell a certain narrative only. So we do have good leaders, but in order for them to be effective, they have to be listened to. And we talked earlier about suppression of even Jewish voices that are speaking out, like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the largest Jewish organization in the US in terms of fastest growing Jewish organization. Mainstream media would not allow them to be on the shows.
Right. I'd like to ask what actions you would recommend as most important for people to take now. This is a shared experience. What do we need to do?
Well, there are thousands of things that people can do. I have on my own website, Qumseyah.org, and I'll put it in the chat room because that question was in the chat room.
Okay.
I have what you can do with dozens of activities. People can educate themselves, can engage in boycott, divestment, sanctions, which is a tactic that we used in South Africa to affect government policy. So boycott Israeli products, boycott American products that support Israel, like Starbucks, McDonald's, etc. You can also write to newspapers, pressure engage in politics. Don't let the politicians run the show. Embarrass them, stand at their offices, tell them they are supporting genocide by voting that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism, that anti-Zionism means you are for human rights, you are against racism, you are for Jews, for Christians, for Muslims, to live in equality in Palestine, not in a racist apartheid system.
We have a question, and I'm paraphrasing. One of our favorite guests and a very good friend of our show is Professor Emeritus of Law Francis Boyle, leading activist, not just a peace activist, a legal activist.
Yeah.
And he has taken war criminals to the World Court, etc. And I'm trying to channel him right now. He's a very good friend of the show, and we love him a lot. And I think if he were here as part of this conversation, I would think he would be asking, given that the United States is so, our position on Israel isolates us so globally, and it enables us to be contrary to our own U.S. law. For example, why do we send billions of dollars of taxpayer money to Israel to commit war crimes while Israel persistently violates human rights, consistently commits war crimes, consistently violates the law that is enshrined in the Leahy Amendment? Why? Answer Professor Boyle as he's being channeled through me.
Yes, indeed, this is the puzzle that the American public need to understand. We actually sent Israel this year more per capita than we sent to many American states per capita. So we give Israel, and this year, if they approve the additional aid that they plan to pass for Israel to replenish its stockpiles of weapons, white phosphorus and depleted uranium bombs being dropped on civilians, if we add all of that in, for this year, Israel would get more money than South America and Africa combined as two continents, if you want, which is incredible. And the reason for that is obviously has to do not with American interests, but with the Israeli lobby in Washington and at the state and congressman level that makes sure that they vote for their own interests as politicians, not as so we should embarrass them that they are not representing their public. I mean, the American public, when asked, should we send Israel these billions of dollars for aid, the American public, by a large majority, said no. So why is it that Congress votes by a large majority to support this? Answer is one thing and one thing only, and that's a lobby.
Yeah. Professor, our time with you is drawing to a close, sadly. How can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
Go to PalestineNature.org. This is our website. PalestineNature.org is our website for the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, and an institute interested in sustainable human and natural community. We have lots of international volunteers and local volunteers, and you're welcome to join us and volunteer with us even from a distance.
And I think Kathy has a question for you real briefly before we have to say goodbye.
Dr. Mazin Qumseyah, an earlier caller asked, where is the leadership? We are listening to one of the major leaders, and I want to thank you. I also can't help but notice that there is a tremendous leadership being exercised by young people and the many, many people worldwide, extraordinary, worldwide, massive, sustained demonstrations. Should everyone be calling for a permanent ceasefire?
Yes, indeed. We call for a ceasefire immediate, because every additional minute, even hour, already a child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. So the immediacy of the situation is there's an urgency there. And not only a ceasefire, I think we should also call for taking Israeli criminals to International Court of Justice. And we have to also end this oppression that has been going on for 75 years. It did not start in the last 2 months. 75 years the Palestinians have been enduring this, and they have been enduring it not at just the hands of Israel, but at the hands of Israeli backers, being the US government, the British government, and the French government.
I have a final word. My grandmother, who largely raised me, taught me one thing about the dead. And she said, the dead are always with us. The dead are always alive as long as there's someone alive around to remember them. And we invoked earlier in this show the Jonah House. And I want to say that I feel that Daniel and Philip Berrigan are very much part of this conversation. God bless you. God bless you, Professor. God bless you and your work. God bless you.
We want you to be safe, and as we approach the holidays, it seems like such a strange contrasting in what's going on in Gaza and in this time of year. Thank you so much for being with us. Our first guest,
Jesse, our warmest greetings as well. Thank you, Mazin.
All right. Our first guest has been from Bethlehem. He is Professor Mazin Qumseyah. He is founding director of the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability. He is a professor of Bethlehem in the University of Bethlehem, and his books include Sharing the Land of Canaan. He's a U.S. citizen of Palestinian origin. We're going to take a brief pause, but John, I think you had some comments to make before.
Yes, this is the anniversary of Standing Rock, and I gave a lot of thought this year as to what kind of Christmas card I wanted to send out. Anyone who wants my Christmas card can write to the station and KMUD, and they'll get the message to me, and I'll send you out my Christmas card. And I want to read you what the Christmas message was. And this was written years ago at Standing Rock, and it celebrates the anniversary, but it also celebrates guests like the two guests we have today, and it celebrates this station. It celebrates the political awareness and the peace activism that is part of the daily life of this station. If you support shows like ours, support this station by becoming a member. Our show's engineer is the membership director, Dorothy. Give her a call. Become a member. I'm renewing my membership for Mary and myself, our family membership, at the end of this call. I'm happy to do it. Let me read you very quickly what I wrote at Standing Rock in 2016. Standing Rock proved that many seemingly unlinked grassroots groups can empower each other to work for the people and for Mother Earth. Standing Rock also revealed the degree to which the corporate and the corporate state and the police state are one and the same. We now know there is no functional distinction between the corporate state and the police state, and this development is the most critical stage of historical fascism. During Standing Rock, the Osseti tribe and other NODAPL camps were all heavily infiltrated by all company police and federal agents, some observing and reporting and some actively inciting confrontations to discredit our movement. Government and ETP paid bots and trolls, flooded the media and social networks with lies and disinformation. Helicopters and Cessnas, some with Border Patrol markings, circled our camps continuously whenever the winter weather allowed it. They jammed our communications, and all major police forces have these illegal dirt box systems. Federal agents photographed our every face, every protester, for the police state's facial recognition database. And the joke was, if you ain't in the facial recognition database, baby, you ain't trying hard enough. All this sounds crazy, paranoid, I know. but it happened at Standing Rock, and it's still happening today. What did Standing Rock teach us? Standing Rock taught us that the New World Order is right here, right now, and most Americans have surrendered without a fight, even without a whimper, before the battle was even joined. I want to celebrate this station for bringing voices like our own and and more importantly, the voices of our guests to Northern California and to the world. Thank you, KMUD. Please become a member.
Thank you, John. It's 32 minutes past the hour if you're just tuning in. This is Heroes and Patriots. We're next going to be speaking with Kathy Kelly. Ms. Kelly is board president of World Beyond War and a co-coordinator of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. We want to talk about that as well. She has made over 24 trips to Afghanistan from 2010 to 19, living with young Afghan peace volunteers in a working class neighborhood in Kabul. Kathy has been an educator for most of her life, but she believes children of war and those who are victims of violence have been her most important teachers. She's been on our show before as our guest, and we welcome her back now. Hello, Kathy. Welcome back.
Well, thank you so much, Mary and John. It's very important to be with Mazin Qumseyah today, and to be with you is a real privilege.
Could you just react briefly to what he was saying to our audience?
Well, I'm certainly aware of how hard he has worked, during these 75 years of oppression. Mazin, as a young geneticist working at Yale, began to do tremendous education and outreach all across the United States. We had something called the Wheels of Justice bus tour. But then he went on, scaled up in a sense, this incrementally but extremely valuable growing effort to proclaim biodiversity within Palestine and to work in relation to the ecological collapse that we're all facing. He has tried on multiple fronts, if you will, to resist the war against humanity and to keep asking, how can we learn to live together without killing one another? But right now, the horror that's unfolding all around him in the West Bank, certainly in Israel on the time of the October 7th attack, but so massively in Gaza, is something that requires worldwide response, and that is happening. We hear UN officials telling us that more people in Gaza could die from disease that's so predictable than even from the horrible bombings. And of course, we've seen this before in Iraq, as the Saudis have bombed Yemen, and then the rapid spread of cholera in Haiti. We've a great need to listen to the healthcare delivery experts on the ground who are sounding the alarm.
Kathy, you're a leading peace activist. How would you comment on the peace movement's response to the war crimes committed by Israel that we're now seeing in Gaza?
Well, John, when I was in Iraq in 2003, prior to the shock and awe bombing, I thought, no. They're not going to go ahead with this. The world is demonstrating. The Guinness Book of World Records said the largest massive movement of people had turned out. And I thought, this can't be that they'll go ahead with the war. I was completely wrong. The war went forward, and there was just this kind of curious silence. I mean, we were in Baghdad and the electricity was cut, so I didn't know fully until I returned to the United States that all of those massive demonstrations had sort of ground to a halt. Not everywhere, but there wasn't a consistency. This is not what we see today. Every weekday, and certainly every weekend, you see massive numbers of people assembling and basically saying, up with this, we will not put. It must stop. And I think that, woefully inadequate as it was, a 7-day ceasefire happened not because those flunkies who are controlled by AIPAC in elected positions in Western countries had mercy and empathy and shame and a desire for reparations, and so said, okay, we'll go forward with the ceasefire, but because they were probably afraid they'd never get reelected if they didn't start listening to the clamoring public immediately outside their doors, inside their offices, at major capitals. And people are also writing their congresspeople, writing the letters to the editor. So we must keep this momentum going at a time when, as Mazin says, every 10 minutes.
What has changed in the past? If you criticize Israel, you were labeled as an anti-Semite, or a self-hating Jew if you were Jewish. And now there's this widespread reaction to Israel's war crimes in Palestine. You even have the president of Harvard, the first black woman to be president at Harvard, in the hot seat over this. But she refuses to back down to the pro-Israeli lobby on the basis of principle. What changed in our lifetime?
Well, I think part of it is the hard work of education. Education about the realities that people in Gaza are suffering. People have gone to Gaza, or they've tried to go to Gaza, and they've come back and they've said, this is what we've seen and heard. And eventually those stories get out in spite of the blockade enacted by the mainstream media. And I think that this will continue, particularly because the statistics are so egregious. I mean, Israel cut Gaza off after October 7th from electricity and water. There's some that's being allowed in now, but there are 65 sewage pumping stations in Gaza and 5 wastewater treatments, and all of them have been forced to stop operations. Now, this means untreated sewage is being released into the sea while solid waste is being built up along the streets, and there are corpses waiting to be buried. Of course, this is going to lead to outbreaks of waterborne diseases and even more suffering. And who is being punished? Children who can't possibly be accountable for what Hamas does. Helen Caldicott, way back during the height of the Cold War, once said, there are no communist children. There are no capitalist children. There are just children. And I think people around the world are saying, we're not talking about Hamas children or Israeli children. They're children. They're toddlers. They ought not to be suffocating to death, to be tortured to death, to be starving or losing their bodily juices in their blood from diseases like gastroenteritis or typhus or cholera. This is wrong. And there's going to be a massive cognitive dissonance during this holiday season. Because how can people celebrate their own security and comfort and ability to bestow presents on one another while we know that U.S. taxpayer dollars have paid for 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on villages and cities in Gaza?
Speaking of big bombs, I can't remember his name, but there was one extremist in Netanyahu's cabinet who actually called for the Samson option if Israel were to start losing the war for Palestine.
John, I've long thought about tunnels. And if you were to dig a tunnel that would allow for all of the United States weaponry given to Israel over the years, wouldn't that tunnel have to be the size of the Grand Canyon? I mean, we're talking about D9 bulldozers, Apache helicopters, the 2,000-pound bombs, the F-15 fighter jets, the massive equipment the United States has given to Israel. And then we have to also think about the cover Israel gets within the United Nations. But the most important, dangerous, hideous tunnel in that region is in the Negev desert. It's called the Shimon Peres Nuclear Research Center. It was formerly called Dimona, and it is storing at least, I take that back. It developed at least 80 thermonuclear weapons. Never has Israel acknowledged that it is a nuclear power, that it did bring nuclear weapons into the regions. And because they won't acknowledge it, even though the CIA knows it, the FBI, every intelligence agency knows it, but because they don't acknowledge it, there's no inspection by the International Atomic Energy Association.
It's just double standard. This is where I want to bring the Berrigan brothers into the discussion, because they were very ardent anti-nuke activist. Israel, and we've done a number of shows on Israel's nuclear ordinance. Israel has anywhere, it's estimated, up to 400 nuclear devices, some as small as and miniaturized as could fit in a landmine that they have put on the Israeli-Syrian border, Golan Heights. Very sophisticated nuclear weapons technology. The Samson option that I referred to earlier, again, and it's held by extremists in Israel, is that they would rather blow up the Middle East with nukes than ever surrender. Let me repeat that. And you can look it up. The Samson option. They would rather blow up the Middle East than surrender an inch of what they consider to be the Holy Land. It's insane. And you had a member of Netanyahu's own cabinet espousing the Samson option during this last incursion into Gaza. Kathy, just comment on that for a second. The madness of that, Kathy.
Well, it's good to read Seymour Hersh's book entitled The Samson Option and stay in touch with Mordecai Vannunu's incredible revelations that helped the world understand that, in fact, Israel was creating nuclear weapons, and the United States has helped them to do it all along. Phil Berrigan used to say, especially toward the end of his life, don't get tired. Don't give up. And I think that's the mandate that we face right now. And, we're not only facing ecological collapse and we aren't able to address it at all adequately because we deal with war after war after war in our permanent warfare state, but we're also facing nuclear weapon proliferation. And again, the ability of people to collaborate and work together across borders is extremely important. But, with a glimmer of hope, John and Mary, maybe we are seeing that kind of collaboration in the massive worldwide resistance to Israel's apartheid state and the desire to see the International Criminal Court take the ethical principled steps of condemning this and investigating it, investigate Hamas as well. But I think we may be seeing more of a recognition that we're paying for this, and this is sickness, that our foreign policy is diseased and sick, and acknowledge. It goes back to the extermination of people who were the Native American populaces here. Certainly we have to look at the hideous shame of enslavement and all of the people from Africa displaced. Our history green-lighted for other countries all around the world. Terrible, terrible policies. But we do find people saying we want it to stop. I was in Gaza in 2009. I want to tell you that a guy from my neighborhood, he was Palestinian. He'd gone over and done his medical training in Dubai, and he was a volunteer in the Al-Shifa hospital. And I said, well, what do you think I should say when I get back to the United States? And he started kind of almost going on a rant, saying, tell them about dense inert metal explosions, tell them about white phosphorus, look at what the consequences are. And then he stopped himself, and he was silent for about a minute. And he said, no, go back and tell them U.S. taxpayers paid for all of this.
Yeah.
And that's the shame we face.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. If you're just tuning in, we are speaking with Kathy Kelly, and you are able to call in and ask questions at number 707-923, excuse me, 3911. You have devoted much of your activism for the after effects of children and villages and cultures. And I wonder, the two-state solution seems to have been spinning around for many, many years. We still seem a long way off of it. But the families that are left behind after this kind of event, this war event, what kind of scars are they left with? And do they ever fully recover, in this case, in Palestine?
Well, of course, we're talking about numerous children who've been orphaned, and many have already lived through 3 massive bombings, and so they likely become embittered. We're talking about people who've been maimed, who've become legless, armless, eyeless. It's a tremendous challenge, I'm sure, for people to go back and to rebuild, but this is what must happen. Otherwise, I do not believe that would be acceptable for Israel to say, well, why don't you just leave Gaza? Why don't you go into some other enclave and be pushed out with a new Nakba? We cannot accept this. And so the call for reparations has to be so serious. It should have been much more serious in making reparations to Iraq, making reparations to Afghanistan. And the U.S. didn't come near spending what it should have spent by taking money away from the Pentagon. But this is what we have to call for rebuilding, for reparations, for those sewage and sanitation facilities to be fixed, for the electrical systems to be repaired, for the cement to be bought in, to rebuild. And it's amazing how resilient populations have been. The United States bombed the daylights out of Vietnamese people, and they were forced into tunnels. They have a society today that is, in many ways remarkable for its ability to rebuild.
Kathy Kelly, we have a caller for you. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead with your question.
I'd like to remind people that this is the voice of the free, people-powered radio, KMI. Without the voice of the free, we are all slaves. I'd like to ask a question in regard to the upraising of speech in order to focus on peace and the ostracization of Rashida Tlaib, representative of Dearborn, where I was born, Michigan, and Susan Sarandon being thrown out of the Screen Actors Guild. I'd like to remind people that professors are losing their professorship, students are being thrown out of university, attorneys are being denied positions, and we still have the Alien and Sedition Act in the form of the Insurrection Act that is being called out for Donald Trump to use to put American troops on the street to stop our speech. I'd like to address that. I'd like to thank each of you for being heroes and patriots. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum and shalom.
Thank you, caller. Kathy, do you want to respond to what he's saying?
Well, I certainly believe that Donald Trump would initiate a lot of retaliatory actions were he to come into power. But I don't think that we should believe that we then must just simply stand back and allow Democrats to continue to commit war crimes and wage crimes against humanity. And we have to recognize that a lot of those Democrats are beholden with a kind of a revolving door to the Pentagon and the military contractors. Respectfully to your caller, I want to invite you to be part of what we're calling the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, to hold accountable companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and the drone producers, General Atomics, that are profiting wildly, massively because of war after war, and particularly now after October 7th, their profits have shot up. And so we want to say that there's no reason why they would want to see these wars stop, and they have tremendous influence over every elected representative in this country. So we have some brave ones like Rashida Tlaib, who refuse to be bullied by the lobbying and the revolving door of these companies. But please consider going to merchantsofdeath.org, register to hear our weekly episodes that are released, half-hour segments telling about the consequences of war in Somalia, in Syria, in Gaza. Our first segment was on Gaza. And then hear from Christian Sorensen about where you can go to protest these corporations. Hear from retired Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who has a very essential analysis of what's happened in this country in terms of the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex, as Dwight Eisenhower called it. And then join us for a December 30th meetup. We're going to meet during the holiday because we are aware that a lot of people are finding it quite difficult to celebrate during this time of massive bloodshed and sickening disease.
Yeah. So much killing, Kathy, as you know, from your work and your research, is done at a distance, and so genocide is made much more palatable. You wrote a brilliant piece, I remember, a while ago called "The Ghost and the Machine." It was about drone warfare. And what we've seen here in with Israel's latest war against the people of Palestine was so much killing done by the Israeli Air Force and by artillery. Again, impersonal, killing at a distance. As a peace activist and as a deeply religious person, speak a little bit about how genocide is just made much more palatable when it's done at a distance. That machines enable this kind of genocide, and it enables it without, very much public outcry.
Well, John, if I could again return to being in Gaza at the time when finally, after a bomb exploded once every 11 minutes for from 11 till 1 at night, and then again from 3 till 6 in the morning. Poor Rafah, that's the town I was staying in. It was just battered. But when the ceasefire was declared, and I've seen this in other countries, the children went out. They got a tarp. I remember they were dragging me by the hand. I thought, where are we going? There's tunnels all over the place. They got a tarp and they collected twigs and scrub brush because they wanted to pull that tarp back to their mothers and fathers for use as fuel. And I've seen kids, go out and collect bricks so that their parents can build a shelter after a war. Well, there were some elderly guys sitting around a garbage can fire. And they called me over, and I thought, I don't know, my Arabic is too terrible. I'm not going to be able to say more than hello. But one of them spoke English pretty well. And he said, you might wonder why we don't help these children. And I said, no, just stay here and warm up. And he said, if we go out and we pick up a log, that drone flying overhead might think we're picking up a weapon and we might all be killed.
Wow.
Drones don't have accurate information about what's happening on the ground. They pretend they do, but Daniel Hale is in prison in Marion, Illinois penitentiary because he disclosed how 90% of the time they had the wrong information. And that's why this group I'm president of, the board president of, World Beyond War, we're against every war, every weapon. We don't want to cherry pick. And the drone proliferation is extremely, extremely dangerous. But that same garbage can fire I told you about, another man piped up and he said, do you know about the Gazan doctor who worked in Israel and his children were killed and his nieces were killed even after he had begged the IDF, call off your tanks, you're on my block, that's my home, I'm working in a hospital in Israel. They killed his family. Do you know what he entitled his book? Dr. Isuddin Abulaya. He entitled it, I Shall Not Kill. He still refuses to kill.
Wow.
Dr. Isuddin Abulaya. And I want us to work together to find out how can we live together without killing one another. But essential to that is get rid of the weapons and the ammo and listen to Albert Camus, who said, I, for my part, will wage the formidable gamble that words are stronger than munitions. If the words tell lies, that doesn't help us, does it? And so we have to seek the truth. We have to seek to be truthful about our own history, about the Israeli history, and tell all the oppressors who use apartheid as a method to oppress other people and practice creation of genocidal conditions, that they must give up their colonial oppressive power. They're on the wrong side of history.
We have a caller. I don't know if they're still listening, but we are almost out of time. Caller, if you're still on with us, please go ahead with your question.
Oh, sure. I'd just like to say, in order to cut off the funds for the war machine, we're going to have to change the composition of the Congress next year. And I just wanted to point out that there were 22 Democrats in the House who voted to censure Representative Rashida Tlaib. And these 22 Democrats exposed themselves as tools of the Israeli government. I'd just like to point out who they are real quick, if I could.
Okay, quick.
Okay, it's Steve Cohen from Tennessee, Jim Costa from California, Angie Craig from Minnesota, Don Davis, North Carolina, Louis Franco, Florida, Jared Golden, Maine, Dan Goldman, New York, Josh Gottheimer, New Jersey, Greg Landsman, Ohio, Susie Lee, Nevada, Kathy Manning, North Carolina, Jared Moskowitz, Florida, Wiley Nickel, Florida, Chris Pappas, New Hampshire, Mary Perez, Washington, Pat Ryan, New York, Brad Schneider, Illinois, Tim Schreier, Washington, Darren Soto, Florida, Richie Torres, New York, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, of course, Florida, and Frederica Wilson from Florida. All tools of the Israeli government. They all need to be defeated in the Democratic primaries next year.
Caller, thank you for those comments and for making us aware of that. Kathy, we are out of time, I'm afraid.
But you get the final word.
Yes.
You get the final word. First of all, thank you so much. And again, I look at you and I think of the Berrigan brothers. From my heart, thank you.
Live simply, share resources. We catch courage from one another. And I think that as we believe that nonviolence can change the world, the occupation mantra that was so important during the Occupy project, we are many, they are few. And love of enemy, certainly. But let's express our solidarity together and be grateful for it. Thank you so much for the time with you and with Dr. Mazin.
Thank you, Kathy. It's been a pleasure to have you back on the show. And with that, we want to remind all of our listeners that this show and other shows that you enjoy need your support. The station is in its fund drive for the next few days, and it's never too late to give.
Yeah.
And during this holiday season, we definitely want to thank all of our listeners who have been supportive of us throughout this year and for the last 6 years of the show. And John, did you want to wrap us up?
We want to thank KMUD. We want to thank our show's engineer, Dorothy, who is also the membership director. We want to thank everyone at the station, salaried or volunteer. This is People Powered Radio.